I'm going to share my screen here real quick.
Okay, I'm ready.
I am on the, I shared the wrong slide deck. Hold on a second. Look at this again. So you're in, are you in Jersey City? Where
Yeah, I am.
How long have you been in Jersey City?
For the last 6 years.
6 years. And you moved there from Mexico, correct? Or
Yeah,
how did you settle on Jersey City?
out of necessity. Because my kids, when we were still in Mexico, in Veracruz, one day, in a similar fashion like I did with my father many years ago, came up to me and said, "Dad, we'd like to complete high school in the US." And I looked at them and, I learned a lesson from, what happened between my father and I, because at the beginning, my father was not really willing to help me. In the end, he did help me big time. So I said, sure, let's go. But, coming from Mexico and finding a high school, public schools were out of the question because there is a 1-year process. So I was able to find this Catholic private school and happened to be in Jersey City, and that's why we moved there. Then our kids moved out, and my wife and I live here. I mean, right now we're all with our kids again because it's summertime.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me welcome everyone. We're going to start here in about 30 seconds. Please drop us a note in chat and tell us where you're watching from. So I'm just gonna get here, and I love this image that we have up on the screen. Where was that taken at, Ernesto?
This was taken at night at a restaurant in which I used to go to and eat. It's one of those beautiful new fancy restaurants that have come up recently. And I use film, as I told you, and this picture is sort of something that happened in the camera. The film did not advance fully. So basically the light that you see on the left, it's a second frame, but it did not advance completely. And so it became like a magic uh, thing. And, I looked at the context and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw it. But there are actually two negatives combined, of which only one is partially exposed.
It's a beautiful accident. Okay, we're gonna get started. Hi everyone, I'm Joe Newman, and I'm the founder of Focus on the Story, a small nonprofit based here in Washington, D.C. For the past 2 Junes, we've hosted the Focus on the Story International Photo Festival here in D.C. This year we had to cancel our in-person festival, but have been lucky enough to move a lot of our programming online to this virtual festival, including today's guest, who would have been one of our keynote speakers. Before I introduce him, I want to urge everyone to submit questions today. Go down to the bottom of your screen and look for the Q&A box. Put the questions in there, and when it comes time to ask questions, and when we get to the Q&A, I'll unmute your mic and allow you to ask the question yourself. So be ready to do that. Now, on to the to the show. Over the course of the past 3 years, we've been fortunate enough to have some of the best photographers in the world speak at our festival. Today is no exception, and truly, I'm trying to control my fanboy urges here because this is a photographer I've admired for a very long time. Ernesto Bazan burst onto the scene in 1982 when he was named the best young photographer at the Arles Photo Festival. That same year, at the young age of 23, he was invited to join the Magnum Photo Agency. In the years that followed, he would win some of the world's most prestigious photographic awards, including the W. Eugene Smith Grant, the Dorothea Lange Paul Taylor Prize at Duke University, World Press Photo, and 2 fellowships from the Alicia Patterson Foundation and the Guggenheim Foundation. He's had exhibits in Europe, Latin America, and the United States. His photographs are collected at the Museum of Modern Art and International Center for Photography in New York, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and many more. Yet, despite his tremendous success, especially as a commercial photographer, he walked away from it all several years ago and has been quietly leading his best life, teaching workshops and self-publishing his own books. His 3 books on Cuba, Bazan Cuba, Al Campo, and Isla, stand out as one of the greatest photo book trilogies ever published and give us such a tremendous insight into Cuban life that can only have come from living on the island for 14 years. And recently, after a 10-year exile, he returned to Cuba, and he has now published his 4th book on Cuba, 25 de Noviembre. It's truly my pleasure and honor to welcome Ernesto Bazan. Ernesto.
Thank you, Joe, for the beautiful introduction. And as I told you, I feel that there is a special, intimate, and spiritual connection between us. And I look forward to the day that we're finally going to meet person to person.
I echo that, and I was really disappointed that we had to cancel the show this year because I was looking forward to meeting you in person. I want to give a special shout out to Sarah Gordon, who's actually in the audience. Sarah Gordon has been working closely with Ernesto on his book project, on an exhibit that hopefully will come to DC later this year. And Sarah is a wonderful curator and educator, and she connected us, and I'm grateful to that. So thank you, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. Glad to know that you're here.
So we're going to dive in and show some images from your new book, but I think first we should set it up. The book that you recently published is one that you really never thought you'd have a chance to do. I mean, is that correct? I mean, you left Cuba, was it in 2005?
2006.
2006.
July 4th.
And you were told in no uncertain terms not to return.
It wasn't like that. I mean, I was told that I could no longer teach workshops, which is one of the most beautiful things I've done in my life. And I will explain that later. But so once I had to be facing the difficult fact that I could no longer teach in Cuba, where I founded my workshop, which is important to mention, I felt very sad. I felt that a big injustice was being made to me. But I could have stayed in the island and not teach in Cuba. But since I was born free, and that's one of the things that the last book gets across, freedom could not and cannot be compromised. And with great sadness, I said to my wife, what are we going to do? And she said, okay, well, you have no choice. let's leave. And we left. So I could have stayed if I wanted to. I think it's important to say that. But I didn't want my children to learn that freedom can be compromised. It cannot. It's one of the most important things we have in our life. And I just, even though I love Cuba so much and I spent over a decade there, as we said, 14 years, there was a blessing in disguise, as I was telling you yesterday when we were conversing, you know, that if it would have been for me, I would have stayed there all my life. But by leaving the island, I gave also to my family, our twin boys, and my life companion, Sisi, you know, the opportunity to become citizens of the world like you and I. Sisi and Stefan have become US citizen just recently. They all hold Italian passports. So, you know, I didn't think of that back then. And, but it was a good, one of the good things that I remember from that last 6 months on the island was that I started teaching myself Portuguese, which I now use every time I go to Bahia to teach. So in the end, everything worked out to be what destiny wanted for me to do.
So rolling forward, it was your wife, Sissy, who basically had a dream that you could return to Cuba. Can you tell us a little bit what happened and how that led to your eventual return?
Yeah, for me, Cuba was a closed chapter after we left. And, you know, I was just missing it so much. But it became persona non grata. And, you know, I knew that nothing was going to come out of this. And then one morning in 2015, she woke up before me. And when I woke up, you know, I was drinking my cup of coffee, and out of the blue, she said, "I dreamed that you can return to Cuba." I almost, you know, spilled the coffee. Um, and she said, "And why didn't you tell me that?" She was almost upset. "Why didn't you tell me that you will be teaching workshop there?" And I looked at her in disbelief. I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, let me double check with reality." And so she did go to the Cuban consulate, and about half an hour later, she was told that I was welcome to return. It took me a year to digest all of this, and then finally I timidly returned in 10 years and 10 days exactly after I left, with a few students of mine. But and the funny thing about that, Joe, was that I was the only one that had a digital camera with me. all my students had film camera, like also I had one with film, actually two. And at the end of the day, we were only looking at my pictures.
But they're your students, so it makes sense that they all brought film cameras. I'm surprised that you were the one that had the digital camera.
Yeah, and so from that very early start, as I told you, I had no clue that I was going to return so often, and that out of this would come out this completely, and I say it very humbly, totally unexpected fourth book, which is turning the so-called Cuban trilogy into Cuban tetralogy. And it's kind of mind-blowing and, as I said, also humbling to think that I've devoted almost 30 years of my life to one single subject. I mean, it's not the only subject I've been working on, thanks to the workshops, but it's pretty amazing to think of that.
Well, it's, I mean, it's a testament to your skill that these books basically give us such a great insight into Cuban life and the Cuban people. I, you know, I picked them out of my bookshelf last night and refreshed my memory. And Alcampo, I was just looking at it, it almost brings you to tears. It's so beautiful, and just, you know, that you can tell that there's love coming from those pictures. And it's just wonderful. All the books are wonderful. I couldn't pick my favorite. This latest book, the one that makes it a quartet, is markedly different, right? In tone, in style. And I want to go into some of that. Let me go ahead and share my screen again and bring up some of your photos from the book.
Yes.
So when you arrived in Cuba, I've heard you mention that you were just surprised about how different it felt to you at night than when you were there before. Can you go into that and talk a little bit about this image?
Yes, it's a very important question. In my previous 3 books, with a few rare exceptions, most pictures were taken in broad daylight. Why? Because at the time I never thought that taking pictures at night would interest me. When I returned immediately after Fidel Castro died, I arrived on a late flight, and you know, looking at the city so quiet, in plain darkness, with just a few lights, almost no people on the streets because they were mourning their leader and all of that, made me realize that there was another big subject that could be delved into. So the very first night we arrived, you know, on the 30th of November, for different reasons. And as I explained, I was not interested in covering the journalistic event. I just wanted to be there at that very important historical moment and see how I felt, try to see how Cubans felt. So the preface to the book, as you might have noticed, are 6 images all taken at night, which wants to give a sense of how I first felt arriving back to the island 10 years later. And this is one of them.
So you were in Cuba, you returned to Cuba in July, and then you went back to Cuba after
in November of 2016.
After Fidel.
Right.
And that was, you have a story behind what, you know, behind that involves Sissy again. Can you tell us that?
Well, that is the story. She gave me an order. Once again, I wake up and I find a text message with an order. It was not a suggestion. She said, "My love, Fidel died, go to Cuba." Then 20 minutes later, a good friend of mine, Juan de la Cruz, sent me another WhatsApp message saying, what happened? I mean, what are we going to do? And I said, you know what we're going to do. We need to go back. And that's what we did. And but once again, I would just go there because, you know, there were all those uncanny messages given to me or orders. But I had no idea back then that I was going to create a 4th book. And it's important to explain that it was all an intuitive process. until finally looking at the images after the first 2 or 3 trips and liking some of them. I thought I was crazy liking them because maybe I'd taken them, but then I showed them to Sisi and then to some of my students. And they all said to me, Ernesto, you're not crazy at all. But these pictures are quite different in terms of approach from the ones you've taken in the previous 3 books. So that became something which I became aware of, because I was just taking pictures. I don't think much when I'm taking pictures. So I became aware that my pictures were different. I was 10 years older, and my sensibility had changed. And as I was saying, you need to keep in mind that it's not only the 3.5 years that I spent doing this book that come into this book. There are the 10 years absence and the 14 years that I spent living there. Interestingly enough, some pictures that did not make the cut of Isla, some panoramic images, which I discovered by chance once again in Veracruz, inside a box, finally made their appearance in this book. Like this
Is
one.
this one of them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I want to go back to what you just mentioned about it had been 10 years and you had changed. Let's first ask, what was the biggest change you noticed in the island, whether it's something physical or mood, or what was the thing that struck you as the biggest change?
Well, Raul Castro, being a much more pragmatic leader, did make some changes to make Cubans' life easier. The time I was living there, you could not sell your house, your car. You could not turn your car into a taxi. I mean, the restaurants had a lot of restrictions. So he opened up all of that. So Cubans could sell their homes to other Cubans, could sell their cars, they could become drivers. So I saw all of those as very good things that he did. But overall, once you go out of those, let's say, touristy areas, Cuba's remained the same. Not much has changed, in my view. So there is almost, a sense of connection between the 3 books I done, previously, and this one, even though this one, as you said rightly so, it's quite different in terms of the approach. I mean, I hate the term conceptual, but it is more conceptual, as you can see. Just pointed to, I would never taken this type of pictures, 20 years ago. And this brings up another story that, if you want, I can tell.
Yeah, please.
The audience about. Instinctively, I started picking up objects discarded on the sidewalks of Havana. If you go to the next image, you can see the very important one. I liked it. It was a beautiful Coke metal bottle, but the way it had been worn out made a lot of sense and made it more beautiful. Then, I picked up a broken shoe, a communion veil, and a few other things. And then once I was back here and I was looking and holding those objects before my eyes, I realized, just came spontaneously, that I could use them as still life. This juxtaposition that we have just seen, the Coke and the green beret that belonged to Sisi's grandfather, are the juxtaposition between, the power held by the military in Cuba and, the Obama opening that took place in 2014, in which Americans were allowed to go in more so than ever. And so this smash, worn out Coke bottle for me is the incipient capitalism finally arriving, because these are not for sale in Cuba, they're only sold in the US. So this was one of the new aspects of the book, and I felt that they perfectly fit in the story that I wanted to tell, and so now they're part of the book.
I think you use them very effectively in the book, and I love the juxtaposition that you just mentioned. Let's go back to the 10 years from the time you left to the time you returned. We talked about change. How do you, what is the biggest change you saw in yourself as an artist over that time?
Well, I mean, I work instinctively all the time. I don't set up agenda or plans ahead of time. I go to a place. I just go, be in the place, walk around, and react to the location, to the people. So over that period of time, I was continuing to teach the workshops in Peru, in Bahia, and in Mexico and in Italy. It's almost been 20 years. Next year we'll be celebrating 20-year anniversary of having taught Easter in Sicily workshop. So, and we're preparing a new book to celebrate that. Some of my best students are coming to celebrate with me. So going back to your question, I mean, I felt that after having done, which is a book that I'm gonna send you as a present, Before You Grow Up, which is the only one that you don't have of the recent ones, which is a sort of photo family album in which I wanted to tell the story of my family, pay homage to my family, both in Sicily and my own one. I start drawing, I start doing things that, I mean, I call them crazy things that I would not have done in the more traditional books that I had done in the past. So that became part of me, and when I was working on 25 de Noviembre, I realized that adding the still life, the color still lives, and even the collage that I created, they were just part of this growth, this very tranquil and natural growth of mine.
And I'm going to go back to that, but first, this image here. For those who missed our conversation before we officially got started, you were telling me how this was made, and it was an accident, right?
Yeah, I mean, look at this. I mean, if you cover the left lamp, it loses, and then the square and the frame also, it loses the magic. I mean, this extra square, I thought that for first, when I didn't know that the camera that did not advance properly, I thought that it was a mirror, mirroring, you know, somehow what I photograph in the front. But then, I mean, I took my time, I went to my contact sheets, and I realized that the camera made the mistake of not advancing, which once again, it's a mistake, but you know, sometimes in photography, as you will know, mistakes make incredible pictures. So I was lucky enough to be able to do that. There is another picture towards the end of the selection, which is also the product of another mistake, in which I was in the dark room printing this lady in the foreground, and she's crossing the water from Havana to Regla. And, you know, I needed to burn in the dark room, the sky and the sea. And I mistakenly moved the negative slightly. So when I burned in and then I put the paper in the developer tank, I realized that this otherworldly second figure of her was in the picture, like her soul was kind of leaving her body. So, I mean, I'm very happy to share that with anytime. I mean, being interviewed with your audience in this particular instance. But incidents can happen in photography, especially if you use film. And sometimes, very rarely, but they can be adding something very special to the images.
And correct me if I get this wrong, but you're not someone who believes in accidents necessarily. You're a very spiritual person and have cited several times in your life where it seems like fate or a greater power sort of brought you to a certain place. I mean, even your decision to become a photographer at a very young age of 14 was influenced by a dream, correct? Tell us
Yeah,
that.
I was actually 17. I had my first camera at 14. And then there was the dream, which I told many times. Um, and I remember that to me, the most important thing was not the dream in itself, even though it was very important what I was told. I was simply told by a voice, and you decide whose voice it was. I was said laconically, you got to become a photographer. The most amazing thing for me is that, I mean, we have so many dreams, but we don't act upon them. That I did act. I woke up, and I will never forget that. I went to my father and mother, and I told them what I was going to become. I was 17 and I was about to graduate from high school. And my father, being a surgeon, wanted, since I was the eldest, to be following his footsteps. And interestingly enough, my son is now following his footsteps because he's studying medicine. He would like to become a surgeon as well. So at that time, I was too young to fully understand the meaning of all of that. I just act upon the energy surrounding me, push me to start, to initiate this movement that has slowly progressed and then led me to New York, and then led me, I can tell you, 42 years later, that I'm still following my dream. So yes, I don't think there are coincidences in life. If you really pay attention to life, you realize that they're a part of a bigger picture, and the energy very slowly shows and unfolds them to me. But I mean, it's not just me. I want to be clear that it has that. It's for everybody. We're all spiritual beings. That's my belief, more so now than before, because I've been doing yoga and also been doing meditation. And it's clear that we're all spiritual beings, that we have many lives. Right now, I'm reincarnated in this life. And, and why was I chosen to become a photographer? I have no idea. But, it was not just, okay, what I'm going to do when I become, an adult. No, it was a very spiritual calling. And then I forgot about the spiritual calling for many years. I was, after all, very young. I mean, I was 17. I just went about searching and unfolding my life, both as a man, as a professional. And then later, in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, I become aware of the fact that this is a very important part of my life, and I need to pay more attention to everything that happens to me.
The and I don't know if this is just a coincidence or not, but I was in Cuba at the same time that you were after Fidel's passing. I was there, I think the last day of November and throughout the mourning period. So we were occupying the same space unbeknownst to us. And that was unlike any of my other visits to Cuba. I've been to Cuba almost a dozen times, probably 10 times in the last 3 or 4 years. And it's always been such a joyful place with music and people having fun. It was very somber during that time, partly because the state had outlawed music. For one, you couldn't play music, and you couldn't be seen in public drinking. So that probably dampened the mood. But for the most part, the Cuban people that I've met have been very optimistic, very full of hope for the future, at least prior to the last year or so. What is your impression? What was your impression of the mood of the people when you returned during the period after Fidel's passing? What were they telling you, and what were they feeling as far as emotion?
Well, there was an amazing dichotomy, because if you were watching the news, you felt like the whole country was just mourning 24/7. But every morning, walking out on the streets of Havana, life was there as usual. So there weren't any signs. So I started looking for some hints of that morning, of that historical event taking place. And, I did find a few. Of course, there was a good portion of the people that were saddened by that. But on the everyday routine, people had to still survive, make a living, bring food home, go to work. So the book plays on this dichotomy, and that's the way I felt when I was there.
The most adults in Cuba have lived through the worst of times. They lived through the special period after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when people were starving to death on the island. And you were there during that special period as well. And I always felt like that really has created such a strong character in the Cubans that I've met, because they've survived and they've persevered. And you don't, like El Campo, I don't even get the sense that that's happening during the special period, because it's such a joyful work. This book you've got, you've just published, it almost has a little sadness to it. Can you expound upon that, or tell me whether I'm misreading it?
No, I mean, you're definitely right. There is a sort of melancholia to it, sense of sadness. But but at the same time, as I was explaining the other day, there are moments of joy. I mean, there are not many, but there are, because I experienced them, and I wanted for them to be part of the book as well. Um, there was the sense of sadness, of melancholy, comes from the fact that, as I told you earlier, I feel that not much has changed for many Cubans. I mean, so having a Cuban family makes me feel sad about that. So, I mean, on top of that, you have to consider that I have all the memories of the 14 years that we lived there, and some or many of them are happy. But the traumatic 6 last months in Cuba before we left, I stopped taking pictures and started learning Portuguese, as I said. but I had no desire whatsoever to go and take pictures. So returning back, yes, it was a magic dream come true. But then after being there, all this memory returned to my mind, and they influenced my way of shooting. So that's the only rational way I can explain that.
Tell us a little bit about this image. It's a beautiful image. What's happening here?
Well, what's happening here is this guy on the left is painting white dolls into black dolls for Santeria ritual. And then, I was fascinated by what he was doing. I'd never seen that done before. And then the magic of the picture is the two little girls that came by as I was taking pictures of him. And to me, this picture, it's a combination, a good combination of happiness created by the two beautiful little girls. Even though they're out of focus, they're an important presence in the picture. But at the same time, I look at him as a puppeteer, moving around puppets. And all the puppets, all the dolls are upside down and they're all tied to strings. So that's the metaphor in this photograph.
It's an amazing photo, and the children juxtaposed to the dolls is it really takes it to another level. So great. Could you have done this with a DSLR? You all your images in the book are film, I believe.
With the exception of two.
With the exception of two.
Two were taken with a digital camera. Well, I don't know. The other important things to mention for the audience to know is that Bazan Cuba was done most exclusively with a 28, which was my lens of choice. Then one day, I don't remember exactly the date, but after leaving Cuba, I realized that I didn't want to photograph with the 28 anymore. So I switched to a 35. And then, for the last, I imagine 7, 8 years or so, I've only used exclusively the 50. But the other things to notice is the fact that when I was shooting El Campo, which I shot for 6 years, and when I was shooting also Isla, also the last 6 years of our life in Cuba, I started using for El Campo the 50 because I just wanted to have a different look, and I also knowing that I had color film in the camera made me approach reality, particularly the countryside, with a completely different sensibility within my own sensibility. And, as you know, for the panoramic camera, you need to have another approach, another sensibility. So once again, what I want to reiterate is the fact that all those changes were all natural. I mean, I just got tired and I never put a 28 back on my camera.
Really? And this is with the panoramic camera. Is this one of the old panoramic images?
Yes, exactly. And once again, it's a metaphor with the vigilant eye looking at everybody's life. So
you make many references to your students, and obviously they mean a lot to you, and they in fact helped you edit this book, right? Tell me how that process works.
Yeah, my students are probably the most important thing, one of the most important things in my life, because with many of them I've established a relationship of friendship, and we do of their work what I call choral editing. In other words, when we do editing daily during the workshops, I'm not the great master sitting on an ivory tower telling them what I like and dislike. We're all at the same level. I often ask for their opinion on other students' work. So that's the way we work. I also go out with my students, and we happen to be sometimes taking the same situation together. And I'm not afraid of that. I like doing that. I like sharing what I take, what I see, or what they see, and then I see too with them. Then, I realized that, you know, they could give me an opinion on my work. I mean, most photographers don't usually like to have students' opinion once they're working on a project, but I do. So, starting with Bazan Cuba, I mean, I had at least 100 editors, and then the number has been augmented. And now for this book, naturally, I mean, I did not create it in a way, in any rational way, but naturally, there is a group of about 8 students or so that are willing to see, while I'm working on a sequence and an editing of a body of work, they're willing to see on a weekly basis, all the slight changes I make. I show them the pictures, they tell me which one they don't like, which one they don't fit. And if they manage to convince me that, the pictures are not interesting enough, or they're repetitive or whatever, I take them out. And with these students and the other students' opinion as well, I make my books. It usually takes me about 2 years to edit a book.
I think that says a lot about you, that you're so open to suggestions and to, in fact, constructive criticism from your students. Would it be true to say that you've learned as much over the years from them as you've given?
Very well said. I always say that at the end of each workshop, I will be learning as much as they will. I learned so much from them, from their pictures, from their comments, from their friendships. And, I feel very lucky that I've created this community. And it's important to note that, since you mentioned that the book is self-published, and as you know, it's available on Bazan Photo Publishing, as you very beautifully bought your own copy. Uh, it's important to mention that they helped me so much in the fundraising of each single book, because self-publishing a book, it's a very expensive thing to do. We're talking thousands of dollars. And one thing that I do is to create limited editions, which have silver gelatin prints, limited to, in this case, in the last one, we did only 20 images per limited edition. And but then also the students that bought single copy or bought several copies, they all helped me, most of them. And it's very moving, because in time of needs, as you can see who are really your friends and who are not your friends. And self-publishing and doing the fundraising always shows me who are my real friends.
I lost my train of thought on that, but this image is a found image. You actually found that on the streets of Havana?
Yeah.
Wow. What I was going to say was the workshops. How many do you typically teach a year?
Well, I used to teach like 10, 11, but now as I'm getting older, I feel like I don't have the same energy that I used to have. So I'm reducing the number of workshops. This year probably is the one with the least amount. Two were canceled in Italy because of the coronavirus. So now I have three more coming up. So this year altogether, I would have taught 7 workshops, but instead I will be teaching only 5. And, talking briefly about how I feel about all of this right now, it's not an easy moment for anybody, but particularly for the people like me and maybe like you or many others who don't have the ability to move around, to travel like I used to. So I've been basically unemployed for the last 3 months. And having a family makes it harsher on you because, the kids are going to college. One luckily just graduated, but there's still one to go. And there are a myriad of expenses having a family, as you know. So it's a tough moment. The dark rooms are closed, so I don't have access to a dark room where I usually go and print because I still like to create the first working prints myself. So, but it's the time we're living in, and we have to go along with that.
Now, I listened in on your talk last weekend with Elizabeth Christ, and that was sponsored by PhotoWorks at Glen Echo Park. You mentioned in that talk that you're going to have an online workshop, or you're gonna in partnership with PhotoWorks, you're gonna create an online workshop. Can you give us any details on that?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Okay, yes. So right now there are 5 students apparently enrolled. It will be called Telling Your Stories, Use Multiple Image. And they will be starting uh, not this coming Saturday, Saturday of next week. It will be a 5-week workshop. I will meet with the students 2 to 3 hours a week, and they can shoot either now if they want to, or the workshop is also open to photographers. We've been working on long-term projects, and we'll be doing, and I use the plural, once again, choral editing. We'll be doing the editing of their work. There's going to be a session in which I'm going to meet one-on-one to see the project itself and to talk to the photographer more in detail, but all the other 5 weeks will be a Zoom call in which everybody will participate like in a regular workshop. So if anybody's interested, you should write to my friend David Myers, and his email is davidmyers3@me.com. Or you can write to me on Facebook, or I can share the email with you, and then you can share it with your audience if you want.
Can they also go to the PhotoWorks website? And so it's still possible to get into this workshop?
Yeah, it is still possible because it will start next Saturday of next week.
So I don't have the exact website, but you can Google PhotoWorks at Glen Echo, and that.
I don't know if they have it online. I haven't checked.
Okay, they may have some contact info, or
Right.
reach out to me, and I'll try to connect you to the right people. That's exciting. Have you taught online before?
No. And I'm not, at the beginning, I was not very excited. But considering that this is going to go on for a while, and I consider being unemployed. This is a way of trying to make ends meet to a certain degree.
Yes, there is a difference from teaching online to being in person, and a lot of
Yeah.
it is feedback. But it's the world we're in now. I mean, it can be done. It has to be done with certain caveats. But heck, I'm going to go and look that workshop up as soon as I get off here. That sounds like.
Are you teaching workshops also this way or no?
I do trainings, not photography related. Actually, I have another job or I have a job that involves doing trainings online. So
Okay.
I've done those. Someone did drop the URL into chat for Glen Echo PhotoWorks. Let's talk about self-publishing, but let's also talk about walking away from commercial photography. You basically just made the decision that you were. I'll let you put it in words. Why did you walk away from commercial photography?
Well, once again, it was not a dream. It was a decision that I took because after working for over 20 years for commercial magazines and doing pretty good, I just started growing dissatisfied with the type of assignments that I was getting. And without getting into any details, I said I need to make a change. And I said to myself, why don't you start trying to teach workshops? And I remember that one of my students helped me to put my initial web page on the web. And I will never forget that for my first Havana workshop, 8 students walked into our apartment, and that's how it all started. As I said earlier, at the beginning I didn't think much of that. I was just wanted to change, but the workshops have created one of the most beautiful things in my life. And if I'm lucky, some of the next books, like the Sicilian one that I just mentioned earlier, they're all part of workshops. Of body of works created during the workshops. So after Sicily, since most of my work has been done in Latin America, we're planning to do, borrowing Dante's poetic form, the canto. I will call them Latin American cantos, and they will come out first from Bahia, which used to be what I call my new Cuba and my new Havana, Salvador, and then the Peruvian ones, and then the Mexican, and etc. So it's all been a natural process. I mean, I'm sure that I've been guided from the sky. I need to say that. Because even though there are quite a few people teaching workshops, the way I teach mine, with going out with the students, with listening and showing my work, with the interest of wanting to have their opinion, is not, from what I hear, it's not something that happens on every workshop. So I'm very proud of that, and very happy to have the students that I have.
I like that you made a decision to control your life, to be the one that was deciding how you would live it. And in that same sense, you decided to self-publish your book, because surely you could have found a publisher for your book. Tell me why you decided to go the self-publishing route.
Well, because of my first two books, the first two, The Perpetual Past and Passing Through, both of them were done with Italian publisher. And I basically lost control of everything. And I was very unhappy. Of course, I was younger, but I was very unhappy. I mean, first of all, I didn't make any money. They didn't pay me anything. I mean, the idea was that I should have felt lucky that they were willing to publish my work, which is not right, because if the photographer spent time working on a project, and particularly in my case, I spent quite some time, you know, you do need to get royalties at least. But the most important thing was not to lose control of all the key creative aspects of the bookmaking, from, you know, editing to sequencing to creating a cover and to put the quotes, to put anything. See, this that we're looking at, it's one of the two collages in the book. I took the picture of the grandma boat off the TV screen while I was in Havana. Then I decided to make it less anonymous, to put the name, so I wrote grandma. And then the TV screen was surrounding the image, was taken with a cell phone. And then I said, well, we're missing the feet of the screen, of the TV. So I drew them myself. On the other one coming up, you know, once again, I took a picture of Raul paying his last tribute to his brother, taken from the TV. And then with my designer, we decided to use a 1950s look TV monitor to sort of remind people that, to me, Cuba remains a place that belongs to the past. And then underneath of the image, we put. I'm hearing myself. I don't know why. Okay, now it's gone. We put the title, the first one with the grandma. It's amazing. He left Cuba, he left Mexico, Veracruz, the state of Tuxpan, Veracruz, Mexico, exactly 6 years before he died, on the 25th of November of 1956. So once again, is that a coincidence or not? It's up to the reader to determine so.
And we should make it clear, just in case no one has made the connection, the 25th of November is the day that Fidel also passed away.
Right,
so
6 years later.
Amazing.
And
this is the image you talked about earlier.
Yes.
And is this on the ferry to Regla?
Right, exactly.
Been on that ferry.
I can see your knowledge of the island.
It's an amazing place, Regla, because you get out of Havana and sort of get away from the tourists and experience a little bit. I urge anybody that goes to Havana to get outside of Havana, because there's so much more to the island than Havana. This is this is one of those accidents, but you know, a less confident, less accomplished, less integrity of a photographer with less integrity would have said, hey, this is exactly what I planned. I meant to shoot it just like this.
Not in my case.
Yeah. I love it for all the reasons you said. This is another panorama. How did you go about choosing which panoramas you would include in this book?
Well, I made a selection of the current one, I mean, of the one taken in the last 3.5 years. And then, as I said, I discovered old ones. Most of them, with the exception of maybe 4 or 5, were taken in the last 3.5 years. And then, I started working on the sequence, and as I told you, I started sharing all this work with the students, and these are the ones that we came up with. This is an old abandoned theater, which you can no longer enter because it's being renovated. But I love this sense of abandonment and this barrier again, which is what used to be the stage and nature taking over it. So for me, once again, it was a very metaphoric image. And then it's just opposed to the one of the duck. And the beauty of the picture of the duck is that you don't really know whether she's landing or taking off, which is another metaphor for coming and leaving Cuba. People are leaving, people are returning. So he wants to tell the story in that way.
Let me remind folks, if you have any questions for Ernesto, please put them in the Q&A box. We're going to be going to Q&A in just a minute. And that's it for the screen share. Amazing work. That was well worth the time we spent on those photos. I am hoping that this is still going to be exhibited in DC. What is and for those who weren't aware, there was an exhibit planned for the Art Museum of the Americas for this fall. Is that still going to happen, Ernesto? What's the status of that?
The status of that is that if we're lucky, most likely in October, the show will open rather than September.
I'm crossing my fingers on that one. And that's
right.
The one I think Sarah helped curate that one?
Yeah, exactly. Sarah was instrumental in that, along with David Myers. And, the good thing is that the show was planned for 5 months. So I imagine that, if we're lucky, even if it goes up and opens in October, it will still be up for quite some time, and many people in Washington will be able to go and see it.
I'm going to go to Q&A. And the question we have is from David Mong. David, if you're out there, you can now unmute your mic and ask your question.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. So Ernesto, my question actually has to do with dealing with intuition and this idea of calling and whatnot. You mentioned that when you go someplace, you wander around and sort of feel a place, which interesting, at that moment. But I'm also looking at this in the long term. And so my question is, you mentioned that we have so many dreams that we don't act upon. Do you believe that we all have our own calling and should therefore follow that calling? Or can we, as each person, choose and decide our life's path and or change it? Is being a photographer simply one way of many of an infinite number of ways of expressing our calling?
Well, there are a lot of people that might apparently not have a calling. They might not have a dream, or they just study, graduate, if they're lucky, and then they get a job and they work for so many years and then they retire. Maybe they don't think for a moment about the spiritual life. But if you start thinking more as the way I believe we're just spiritual beings that happen to be on this earth for a certain period of time, and then we will turn again into light. Then a lot of things that you apparently did not think were a calling can become a calling. So it's up to each individual to really develop further the intuition and the spirituality that is within us, within our soul, within our heart. And as I said, having been able to do yoga and meditation has greatly helped me lately to sustain myself in these very difficult times.
Thank you for the question, David. The next question is from Orlando. Orlando, if you're there, I'm going to allow you to talk. So please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Just a commentary, because I am also a photographer. Of course, I'm an amateur photographer. And as a writer, I'm interested in ruins and landscapes of disaster. And I would like a comment from the photographer about that tension between ruins and modern developed landscapes in modern democracy. How do you feel we're more aesthetically, or if we are falling into some kind of aesthetizations of the ruins? Any comments about that? I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Orlando, as you could see from the slideshow, I'm interested in ruins. I mean, one of the theater is one of the other many pictures that I've taken. In some of my workshops, I take them to abandoned factories. So all those places which has had a beautiful or better past, and then they've been abandoned, I have a strong interest in them. In Sicily, for instance, I take my students to some abandoned villages to build during the fascist period. They were supposed to be model towns of, what a fascist style life should be like. And now they're completely in ruins. Or even an abandoned church or an abandoned factory in Bahia. So we do share this penchant for abandoned buildings, because they really, even though they've been abandoned, they still, to a certain degree, help you understand what the past was like, and they connect you to the past and the present. And that's one of the things I like to do when I take pictures.
You know, one of the things that makes Cuba so intriguing, especially to Americans, is it's like someone stopped time in 1958, and you're walking into this different era. You've often said it reminds you of growing up in Palermo. Can you tell me about the similarities and your how you compare it to Italy?
Yeah, well, one thing to remember is that both Cuba and southern Italy were run by the Spaniards. So the architectural is similar. There is also a daily life taking place outside of the streets, which also has similarities. And photography, to me, it's also about memories. So the way I got to know the old Palermo, which is still there, I mean, it's changed, but it's still there. It's because I used to go with my grandma to buy groceries in one of those old markets. So then I got the camera, 14, and I started walking around that area because, frankly, the modern parts of Palermo are very ugly and I don't feel any connection to them. But once again, as I was saying, the old Palermo had that connection to the Spanish. I mean, we have been invaded by everybody, including the Arabs, for 3 centuries. So arriving to Cuba, I felt like I was back in the Palermo of the 1940s and 50s. And as I was telling Elizabeth the other day, you know, my mother explains that because when she went to give the last goodbye to my grandfather Ernesto, that died before I was born, while she was pregnant of me, she asked of this very wise and good person to go inside of her in the baby that she was keeping in the womb. So she explained that I was able to see the Palermo of the 40s and 50s thanks to the fact that my grandfather is always with me. So once again, it's a sort of an uncanny type of special connection.
I want to go to a friend of mine now who's Chantel Wong. Chantel was actually, I met her on a trip to Cuba. She was in one of the workshops that I was leading over there. Chantel, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Ernesto, just so amazing, your work. I'm so spellbound by all of the images. I was with Joe on his trip 4 days after Fidel Castro had died, and I was just saw a very, very young country, lots of students everywhere. It caught a lot of my attention, everybody wearing a red scarf, and they were, you know, doing a lot of ceremonies in memory of Fidel. Do you, even the boxing gym we visited was full of young trainers. Did you get the sense of a new beginning, and you know, how do you capture that kind of a sense if you were there or when you were there?
Well, the new generations are there, Chantal. But I'm not sure that they have the option to really do exactly what they want. I mean, there is a government in place for the last 61 years. And it seems like that, you know, is the state, is the government that dictates what people can do or cannot do. So even though, you know, young people that were born after the triumph of the revolutions might have a different outlook, in the end, you know, the opportunities that they have, to me, are kind of limited. I mean, things have changed for the better in the last 12 years or so, I would say. There is more creativity being given to the people. And the only hope that we should all have is that the Cubans will continue to unravel their destiny as a country and see if they will have the opportunity to reach their own goals.
Yeah, I want to add on that too, that I've met a lot of young people in Cuba and highly educated through the Cuban system. And yet there is a little bit sense of despair that, you know, they trained as a lawyer, or they trained as a computer engineer or scientist, but they can't work. They can't find a job in what their field of study was. So they end up doing other things, whether it's driving a car, whether it's leading people up the mountain, whether it's, you know, trying to do something else, like, you know, cutting hair. So it's that dichotomy you spoke of earlier of hope and despair at the same time is definitely prevalent from my experience in Cuba. I'm going to share my screen again, coming to the end of our talk here, sadly. Sorry, I've got so many windows open. I'm going to, okay, here we go. I want to thank you, Ernesto, for such a great, heartfelt conversation today. If you don't have this book, you should go get it. You can find it on Ernesto's website, bazanphotospublishing.com. You can also get through there through bazanphotos.com as well. And there's ordering information on there. It's on my bookshelf. Oh, actually, it's next to me at the moment. Let's go back to that real quickly. The trilogy was so famous and so acclaimed. And then adding this book, is it now a quartet or tetralogy, as you said, or is this a postscript to the three earlier books?
Well, I would say more that it's another piece of my vision of the country and my personal relationship with the island. As I said, I had no idea that my life would give me this privilege to make 4 books on the same subject. So each one of them, as you pointed out, Joe, is uniquely different. So I just can simply say that I feel very, very lucky in a very humble way that almost 3 decades of work. I mean, this is something for young students to think about, how much, in this case, me, has devoted to a single project. And the other things to note is that when we left Cuba in 2006, I had no clue that I was gonna make 3 books. I only felt that the first book was the only one that was going to come out. And then once again, the energy pushed me to look at my color contacts, and I started saying, wow, there are enough pictures, and they're all about a very specific subject, which was the countryside. And as you said, probably is the most joyful of the 4, because once again of my relationship with the Sicilian countryside, which is one of the most beautiful memories that I've had from Sicily. The fact that I had the privilege almost every weekend to go with my parents to my grandparents' house in the countryside, and I would just spend hours playing by myself or with my brothers or with my cousins, and then hang out with the farmers, share the lunch with them. So once I discovered the Cuban countryside and becoming friends with some of my farmers' friends, you know, Sicily was back. So what I wrote at the beginning of 25th of November, that Sicily and Cuba seem to coincide like 2 pieces of a puzzle that my life is. It's very much true.
Well, we'll let historians decide whether
Right.
what the significance of this 4th book is, because we know the first 3 are, historically significant, and I think this one adds to it. I want to thank our sponsors today. Love these folks. Fujifilm. You actually at 2 p.m. Fujifilm Forum. I was lucky enough to be a guest last week, but you should tune in this week. Our good friend Brent Lewis is going to be joining them and talking about a very important subject, and that's diversity in the photo industry. Also want to thank Tamron, Multiple Exposures Gallery, Peak Design, Capital Photography Center, and KEH Camera. Thank you very much to our sponsors for allowing us to do this. Later this afternoon, we'll be back at 4:30 with Sarah Lean, former Director of Photography at National Geographic. She'll be leading a panel of photo editors talking about how to make the perfect pitch. incredibly important discussion for those of us out there who are hoping to freelance our work to some of these editors. Next week, Tuesday morning, we are going to have a great discussion with Laurel Kaur and Leah Millis, and looking at some of their work documenting Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. Really looking forward to that as well. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank Ernesto. I want to thank your wife Sissy for all her influence and getting you back to Cuba so that we can enjoy this fourth book. I want to leave you with the last word. So please, please close us.
Well, I want to thank you, Joe, for this beautiful conversation that we've had. And as I told you, I feel a sense of compassion and spirituality that you have as a human being, and that I'm sure you're aware of. And I feel very, very happy that thanks to Sarah, the two of us connected in many ways. And hopefully we'll manage, God willing, to be able to be together in Washington next year for the Focus on the Street Festival.
Thank you so much.
And please keep me updated. Send me the links to each single conversation, including Sarah Lee this afternoon, which I would love to watch.
Thanks for reminding me. This show will be is been recorded. It's there's going to be a recording on our Facebook page, our YouTube page, and on our website. And I'll send you those links, Ernesto. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Take care.